Welcome to you, Rabbi Joseph. It's been a few weeks since we talked. It's
Yes.
good to see you, and welcome to any who wander in here and join us. And feel free to offer your thoughts. Rabbi Joseph, you want to talk about um, a recent op-ed by David Brooks in the New York Times about religion and politics. Um,
Yesterday, my wife and I saw the movie Hamilton. Go see it. It's fabulous. I've seen it in the theater, but the movie reminded me of its genius moment in not just the arts, but in articulating history. And because I knew we would be talking today, I listened. And not once in Hamilton was God mentioned.
hmm.
Not one.
Which is interesting because John Adams or James Madison rather, well, both mentioned both of them quite a bit.
And I want to make it clear from the beginning. When I worked in the Clinton White House, when I have worked for and supported other people, I, as a rabbi, want my political leaders to have the core religious values I've spent my life teaching. My concern is we have moved into a moment when there is so much certainty about what those core religious values must and can only be.
Hmm. Well, so start with one of the things that David Brooks starts with is sometimes when we look at what we think is an unhealthy fusion of Christianity, in our case, with politics, um, we we want to um, turn towards a separation of church and state that is more apocryphal than is actual in America's founding. So talk about the actual history that David Brooks is getting at first.
Well, he opens with a fascinating quote from Tucker Carlson. And you talk about apocryphal history. I'm quoting Carlson as quoted by David Brooks. This is a religion committed to love above all, to living in peace, harmony truly. It is a universalist religion that believes every person has a shot at heaven. It's not exclusionary at all. End quote. So Brooks is correct in helping frame his question. If this is a spokesperson for this understanding of commingling, where do you go?
Mm.
After reading that passage out of David Brooks, I opened my Hebrew Bible and went to Isaiah 58. Isaiah 58 is read on the afternoon of Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, coming up this Thursday. Isaiah 58, verse 4. For quarrel and strife you fasted, and to strike with a wicked fist? Your fasting this day will not make your voice heard on high. Will like this be the fast that I choose? The day a man afflicts himself, to bow his head like a reed and bed down in sackcloth and ash. Is this what you call a fast? So, my fear has been that the Bible we share, we teach, we preach is disconnected from what tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people are describing as a paradigm of religion and politics commingling.
Well, yeah, hearing you read that passage, I'm reminded of, one of the consistent refrains through the Christian Old Testament is this back and forth, this polarity between God wanting a sacrifice and God not wanting a sacrifice. And it's like, well, wait, you told us to do this. um, um, and, and, and I think one of the lessons to be learned in the scriptures in that way is that it isn't, it isn't easy.
No.
um, and discerning how to be faithful is not easy. um, because it can feel like we're given two different contradictory commandments, and
but
wills.
but
But
yet God
but but
says
the
it.
but the Christianity on display on so many of our screens is very easy, and clear and simple.
But this is the fast that I choose, to unlock the shackles of wickedness, to loosen the bonds of the yoke, to set the downtrodden free, for you to offer your bread to the hungry and bring the wretched poor to your house. Okay, I get it. That is not just a prophetic impulse. It is what Abram understood when he left Ur of the Chaldees. It is what Moses understood at the burning bush. This is the core of what you and I teach. And what Brooks raises, as you just said, is so much easier, so much more for the consumer than what Isaiah is teaching.
And the flip side, because also what Brooks critiques, and the articles from September 25th, if people want to check it out, we need to think straight about God and politics. He's also lamenting the privatization of morality on the left. Um, that that is a different kind of simplicity. Um, and you started by mentioning watching Hamilton in the movie theater, and um, Jonathan Edwards wrote a lot about this at America's founding. That for democracy to work, it has to coalesce around a commonly held belief in the sovereignty of God. Otherwise, you cannot negotiate all the differences that people bring to the public square. And I think that's right. And I think we're living in that disapparition right now.
And Brooks notes that.
Mhm.
I'd add only that a naked public square is a morally ignorant public square. American public debate was healthier, the conversation more profound, when religious leaders like Reinhold Niebuhr, Abraham Joshua Heschel, Martin Luther King, Fulton Sheen brought their faith to bear on public questions.
Mhm.
Today, morality has been privatized, left up to the individual. The shared moral order is shredded, and many people, morally alone, have come to feel their lives are meaningless.
Yeah. Yeah. Before church yesterday, before worship, one of my lay leaders, she's doing a doctorate, in criminal justice. She works in defense intelligence. Um, and she was talking about, needing to cite the Bible, for her coursework. And it was a good reminder that, um, you know, your existence in the world, Joseph, is a reminder to us, that morality is not, that which we have discovered. It's been given to us. That it's revelation, not self-reflection. And that's not to be, and that's not to exclude, like, say, Islam. But all of these are gifts from God. And you know, the move to then individualize and privatize morality, um, is self-defeating.
Well, if it were only self defeating, maybe I would not be as worried as I am. My fear is that the certainty with which this has commingled so quickly around the horrific murder of Charlie Kirk is that it simply adds a more passionate certainty to the necessity of their being commingled.
Mm-hmm.
So, he notes the crucial question is not how to separate spirituality of religious and non-religious varieties and politics, but how to put them in proper relation to each other.
And do you have some thoughts on how to do that, sir?
Oh, how many different ways. Let's begin by admitting there is a religious diversity in America that must be part of this conversation. So I'm pleased that Christians have heard the message of the risen Christ. It's not the only message.
Uh-huh.
I will defend the certainty of that salvation that Christians choose to live. But there has to be some room for the other ways some of us hear the message.
I think one of the things I've been thinking about um, is the way in which so Ryan Burge is a sociologist, and I've done a little bit of work with him, and the way that the term evangelical now no longer refers exclusively to Christians,
Mhm.
that Jews and Hindus, for example, will claim that because it means conservative in their head, and so I think one of the problems that Brooks is gesturing towards is that it isn't simply that Christians have a difficult time. Christians on the right have a difficult time acknowledging and contending with religious diversity. It's that it seems to be that things are shifting so that increasingly people who identify as religious in any way are shifting uh, to one party.
Mhm.
And so that there is something about the way progressives communicate that signals to people, to religious people, that they don't belong.
Or their reflections and implementation and interpretation of Isaiah is not authentic.
Hmm. Yeah. So it's yeah. So it's yeah. Even yeah. I mean, like, where I started in terms of the law being revelation. Um, once you've communicated to me that that value needs to be privatized, you've also signaled to me that I don't belong in your club.
Well, the trouble is if we can't all agree upon the reality that we don't all agree. I don't know what to do.
Hmm.
I really don't know how to be present to the passion in that stadium memorializing Charlie Kirk.
Yeah, I did hear someone comment, that the extent to which kind of Charlie Kirk followers and that kind of religiosity is alien to you, you really are siloed from a huge swath of America.
Isaiah 56, and the foreigners who join the Lord to serve him, to love the Lord's name, to become servants to him, all who keep the Sabbath, not profaning it, hold fast to my covenant. I will bring them to my holy mountain and give them joy in my house of prayer. My house of prayer shall be called for all peoples. Uh, I go back to the basics and ask, how is it that for so many years, Jews, Christians, Muslims could look at a text that they don't all read the same way, but all find it sacred?
Um, and do you have thoughts on what has changed?
It's privatized, it's politicized, and now, tragically, and the thing that worries me the most, it's been weaponized.
Hmm.
It, I cannot tell you how tragic it is to hear the President of the United States disagree publicly at a funeral with the widow of the victim. No, I hate my opponents. It is the most uniquely non Christian statement you could have ever imagined, perversely, at a funeral.
It is. I do. It's on the one hand, it seems like, and I've mentioned, I had no idea who Charlie Kirk was. I have no prior pre-existing opinions about him. But it does seem like, so there's this, desire for revival, Christian revival,
Correct.
is centered around his memory. And that and that's coexistent with what appears to be, um, well, if you wanted to know what the Republican Party looked like without the religious right, we're now living in it. um, and I just don't know how to hold these two contrary things in tension with one another.
And so it's not universal, it's not open, I'm not welcome. And by the way, I hate my opponents. So,
Well, and I was just thinking, because I read an article in the Atlantic, which I think is normally a pretty good journal, magazine. Um, it was an article last week about Charlie Kirk's funeral, and it wanted to use the citation of spiritual warfare language from Paul's letter to the
yeah,
Ephesians as
yeah.
evidence of this Christian nationalist movement. And I'm like, that is like way too easy a connection to make. And if like you hear this very ordinary Christian language in terms of the new apostolic reformation, that tells me that you don't know any actual Christians to be writing about this in the first place.
So, one of the things that frightens me is that you, other normative, quote, mainline Christians, are about to be erased.
Mhm.
So we're privatizing, we're politicizing, we're weaponizing, and we're erasing other Christians.
Well, I mean, it's we're also just not having enough babies. That's part of it too. I mean, JD Vance isn't wrong about everything. uh,
So why haven't more Christians said you're misrepresenting who we are and what we're teaching?
I mean, I think it's interesting to read this op-ed and pair it with David French's op-ed that came out around the same time last week. Where he talks about, for a lot of evangelical Christians, Matthew 5, the Sermon on the Mount, exists in kind of a really unreflected tension with Romans 13, a particular reading of Romans 13, that, we should, as individual Christians, strive to forgive our enemies, in keeping with Christ's teaching and example. And at the same time, we think what Paul is saying in Romans 13 is that we need to uh, defer to the leaders of the state because they are agents of God. I don't think that's a particularly good reading of what Paul's saying there. But yeah, if you've grown up in that context, then it's not surprising that Erica Kirk uh, expression of forgiveness and Donald Trump's expression of an anti-Christian sentiment can exist uh, together.
No, but it is a moment of taking both statements very seriously and having people who are now representing the institutionalities of religion
I mean, yeah, I do think it's, in the same way that it is wrong and anti-Semitic that you have to apologize automatically for everything Benjamin Netanyahu does. Um, and I think the risk is that we're moving to a place where just because I am a Christian, a public Christian, people are increasingly going to assume that I support a particular political ideology. And that's not good for the gospel.
It isn't good for politics, for the gospel, for interfaith relations, and says somehow, just like there's no governance in the government, there's no governance in the public square.
Mhm. Well, it's funny because one of the things I've been thinking about. So I guest preached the Sunday after Kirk's assassination, and um, my friend picked me up at the airport, and he asked me, are you going to mention Charlie Kirk's assassination in your sermon? And I was like, no, you know. And I was kind of surprised because, like, I have very, very conservative people in my congregation, but I don't think any of them have any expectation for me to do that, at my home church. But and so, like, I was, I was thinking about it, um, and how we've only had smartphones for about 20 years, right? Like, you and I can remember a time where, like, that wasn't a constant presence in our life. And in just 20 years, we have been trained to believe that we have to comment immediately upon everything that happens in the world, on social media and whatnot. And so I was thinking about that. And then I preached on Matthew 15 this Sunday. And so there's a dispute with the Pharisees about hand washing. And Jesus' response to that is to take the disciples to Tyre and Sidon from the Sea of Galilee. And so I was just curious. So, like, I Googled, like, on like MapQuest how to get there. And I'm like, well, holy crap. Like, today, if you took a car, it's over 6.5 hours.
Yeah.
And that got me thinking, like, there's all these, it's the norm in scripture that God never does anything in a hurry. Like, like they're in the wilderness a really long time. And it's not that far to go. And so there's just this contrast between the way God works, in both scriptures, in both testaments, and how we think we need to behave in the world right now. And I think that's part of the problem.
When Stephen Miller, oh my God, raised in a Reformed synagogue, said,
Really?
yeah,
Oh, I didn't know that.
oh yeah.
I think he
He,
went to Duke.
um, Brooks quotes him. He pulled off the neat trick of being a Jewish Christian nationalist. And he says, the day that Charlie died, the angels wept, but those tears have been turned into fire in our hearts.
I've heard
That
that. Yeah.
fire burns with righteous fury that our enemies cannot comprehend or understand. That is now being quoted as a religious teaching.
Yeah, I don't you just wish that some of these guys, like, had more dates in high school?
I,
Yeah.
I am embarrassed that there are rabbis that taught him. He had a bar mitzvah. I can't imagine what it must be like to think, okay, I didn't do well, but I didn't produce Stephen Miller.
I mean, yeah, I've thought about, because I've been to the church in Georgia where Marjorie Taylor Greene is a member, but a convert. I mean, she even seems normal now. Yeah, um, and I think it's connected, right? That our felt need to respond instantly to everything, um, is connected to this outrage that seems to be, like, right under the surface of so many people, that, like, we're encouraged to be angry.
That is stoked constantly, algorithmically, in the nature of the chaos reality show, which our president rewrites hourly, daily. It's not what the religion we've taught, preached, and still seek to have meaning in. That's not possible.
Well, and you see it in how quickly um, how quickly leaders in the public square, leaders of the discourse, immediately when something like that happens, immediately go to they did this to us,
Yeah.
with no like no knowledge of like who was this person and what like motivated them. There's just this amorphous they that suggests that you're kind of in a constant state of anger. I just on one level I feel bad for these people. This is not a healthy way to live.
Oh no, but it it has become its own kind of virus for which there are no vaccines and for which wearing masks won't help. Uh, as you noted, even now, the ability to use tragedy as another act of division. Fear replaces the traditional Christian virtue, hope. We are under attack. We have to destroy our enemies. That's the easiest way to mobilize people, writes Brooks.
Mhm.
Um, that's exactly what Netanyahu continues to do. Um, over the weekend, people were exhumed from one kibbutz and moved to the kibbutz on which they were murdered because now their relatives have been freed from hostages. This continues to go on everywhere. The nature of using fear, to which religion used to be able to respond in prayer, in hymns, in meditation. No, as you noted, Jason, God works in long ways called eternity. I will sit in synagogue from Wednesday night, come back very early until the sun goes down Thursday. And that is a day of reflection that gives me a hint to eternity. I fast. I do that which should prepare us for the end in order to go forward. I'm not interested in the hatred and the anger. I want to quiet my soul. So it's a tough time to try and reflect about the eternal teachings when you're living in a world in which consumer religion is being repackaged as part of the politicized.
One of the characters or figures Brooks mentions here, and he has often, is uh, Reinhold Niebuhr and Abraham Joshua Heschel. Um, I don't know that I don't know that the Christian Church has a public theologian anymore, like a Reinhold Niebuhr. Do Jews have an
No,
equivalent figure?
no one at the threshold in any of the so-called movements. We have pundits.
Huh.
We have people who have been thoughtful. Yossi Klein Halevi, Jonathan Sachs of blessed memory. But no, Heschel was a unique moment. Public intellectuals, just that we could spend some time using the word public that hasn't been taken from us and renamed government.
Mm, mm.
Tell me what you think about he writes, people develop an addiction to rapture. What about the current failure of rapture?
I, yeah, I wrote about this last week. Okay, all right. So if you're wondering why you weren't raptured, it's because it's not in the Bible. Okay. But and this is like this fascinates me too. Like, it's one of the rare things where Jesus explicitly says don't do this. Like, like, don't do this. And in fact, when it does, like when the end of the world happens, when the apocalypse happens, it's going to become a complete, like a thief in the night. Um, and yet they're like, like every time I drive past a Seventh Day Adventist church, I'm like, how is this possible? How do you have a whole denomination about being wrong about this thing that Jesus told you not to do in the first place? Like, I just don't understand it. And how like there's a whole, Christian cable like empire built around violating this very clear commandment of Jesus. Um, but all that aside, um, and I do think it's revealing, that the worldview behind the rapture is the view of creation where God is absent, right? So like if Christ has to come back, that means he's not present right now, which is not the teaching of the New Testament, nor is it the teaching that Christians should take away from the liturgy. Um, like Jesus isn't far away because he was just on the altar table yesterday. And in fact, when the book of Hebrews talks about the end with a capital E, it says that Jesus will appear like he does to Thomas on Easter night. Appear because he was already present. You just couldn't see him. And so they're like, if you really think about, like, if you believe in the rapture and you really think about the implications for that belief, it's a really depressing, disenchanted view of the world, um, and a very distant picture of God.
It is the end of history. It's the not yetness. It's the messianic age. It's the glass of wine on the Seder table waiting for Eliyahu. And you open the door and you invite in Elijah the prophet. I always teach you don't want to be at the table when Elijah comes to drink from it. Not a good sign. Um, I think it may be one of the problems we have teaching the discernibility of hope. If you're waiting for that time, which no longer needs hope, people aren't going to sit and be calm and talk to each other and listen to each other.
Um, it's something I thought a lot about. I can't remember his name, the Jewish theologian who taught at Yale. Um, I can't remember. Robert Jensen did a lot of interaction in his work with him, and and I think for Christians, it's the body of baptized believers is the body of the risen Jesus. For Jews, it's the presence of God in the temple, and neither of us have the luxury of viewing the world as like, well, where is God? Um, when instead, like the very serious challenge is journeying through this world with God's presence. And that means, you know, sorrow and suffering. And uh, to try to escape that through sentimentality or fantasy, is not good.
It's not good.
Not
And
faithful.
um, I blame those who continue to work in the very shallow, highly consumer oriented sound bites that Brooks speaks of. We live in difficult times.
Uh-huh.
And if we're going to get past the divisions, it will only be if we stop, listen to each other, and give ourselves the opportunity to find a moment of hope.
Yeah, and Brooks, Brooks reminded me, again, Jonathan Edwards, America's first theologian. Um, something that we have the relationship between politics and religion backwards. That for someone like Tucker Carlson, it feels like, not to impute motives to him, but it feels like um, a certain kind of Christianity is a vehicle to a political project.
Correct.
For Edwards and a lot of the founders who were Christian, the question was instead, how can we best order our government so that uh, the the morality of the commandments can be lived? How best do we order society so that this religious vocation can be fulfilled? Um, and that's
Those
not, that's
came,
not theocracy.
no, those who came from England, Puritans, were profoundly religious people seeking to live in a place where that religious identity would not be marginalized and erased. The
Yeah.
first Jews who came from Recife, Brazil, were running away from a Portuguese Inquisition. And in order to get in, they had to give Peter Stuyvesant everything they had. Can't we remember where we started?
Yeah.
We started with people whose tenacity and resilience about living religious lives brought them to America. That kind of humility is not a part of what Brooks was describing.
N- No, and um, what I was trying to say earlier about religious people sorting themselves increasingly into one party, um, I think a better way of saying that is that you and I, you as a serious Jew, me as a Christian, um, I'm thinking of my wife's friend Mona, who is a, a very serious Muslim. We have more in common um, than I do with a Christian for whom Jesus is just a teacher of a golden rule.
Correct.
Um, like you and I have more in common than perhaps you do with just a secular Jew. Um, and so I think we have to cro- cross religions, make friends with people for whom those religions are actual commitments. Um, and maybe that's where to start.
Look, um,
'Cause that's
I
my frustration with most ecumenical groups is, I get there and it turns out what we all have in common is the assumption that we're all progressive Democrats. And I'm like, I don't have time in my life for this. I have no interest in this.
no, in I think what you said immediately on getting on today. None of this is easy. Most important thing that Brooks sensed is all that was too easy.
Mhm.
I'm glad Kirk's wife could forgive the murderer. I'm proud of her, but I hope she's grieving because this is a horrible, horrible death.
Well,
And
and what's interesting too is, I read a book not that long ago about the fallout from the murders at the Mother Emanuel Church in Charleston.
yes,
That to just focus on those expressions of forgiveness, um, like that had a real cost to it. A lot of those people's families and friends fell away. There was a dysfunction in the church about how to handle donations that they received. Um, it- yeah, the work of forgiveness is a lot messier and, you know, one step forward, two steps back. Um, so it's right to celebrate it, but it's naive to think it's just that moment.
can't be. I will take you into the synagogue with me Thursday while I'm praying and hope that those of us who take this difficult engagement with God, with Scripture, with morality, that we'll have a greater opportunity to engage in this new Jewish year.
Well, I will pray for you on Yom Kippur. I feel bad for whatever goat meets its end. I'm just joking. But
Yes, don't sacrifice goats. Please, anyone listening, we stop doing that.
Michael Vichigog. That's
Oh,
the
my,
name I was trying to remember. Yeah,
yes, yes,
yeah, because that's it, like
yes,
just like thought experiment is like
yes,
what if Israel rebuilds the temple in Jerusalem? Like
yes.
what are Christians going to have to say about that? And yeah, and Robert Judson says like, well, Christians are going to have to acknowledge that in some way Yahweh is enthroned there. So yeah. Anyway, I will. Steve Larkin was a part of this conversation, and I am now going to go have lunch with him. So
God bless.
bless.